Hi, everybody. Thank you for sitting. We'll get started so we can get back to eating and drinking after this. Welcome to Mastercard. I'm Alli Mooney. I lead the content design practice within Mastercard's Foundry and the Customer Experience and Design Guild. And I'm really thrilled to be hosting this UX Content Design NYC event. I know it's been a while. It's great to see everyone in person. I want to welcome, before I get to the panel, so I'm going to be hosting the panel, but before we get to that, I want to welcome Shane Cumming. He's the Chief Revenue Officer at Acrolinx. And thanks to that revenue, we have food and drinks. So they're also our sponsor. So thank you, Shane. You're doing a great job. And Acrolinx. So Shane's going to tell us more about Acrolinx and how they use AI to help content designers in their work. So I'll hand it over to Shane.
Thanks, Alli. So how are the drinks? Are the drinks good? Oh, all right. So you're welcome. So good evening. We're really excited to be here and really appreciate the invitation from Melinda Belcher. There you are. Thank you. And I'm also, when I went through the list of people who were attending, I noticed that we have quite a few people from companies that are actually customers of Acrolinx already. And I'd be willing to bet that some of you may not know that your customers you are customers of Acrolinx. So when I was looking at the list, you're gonna have to let me see if hopefully I don't miss anything. What I saw on the list was JPMC, Mastercard, Citibank, Citi. All right, they're probably out the bar still. Google. Amazon, Adobe is on the list, maybe, coming later. Apple, new customer, and Okta was on the list, and Jane, of course, from FM Global. So, I also wanted to say thank you to those of you here for supporting our business. We really appreciate the partnership. Okay, so there are a lot of people in the room who don't know Acrolinx, including some people who may work for those companies. So I wanted to take a few minutes to explain and introduce ourselves a little bit, but also to share a perspective on generative AI and what's important and share a little bit about what we're doing with it and how it applies into our technology. So we have a few perspectives. One is, first, that business is really all about relationships. It's about relationships, and relationships are built on trust, and trust is built on communication. Okay, and we believe that the primary channel that companies, large enterprises, communicate with their customers is actually through content. So let's quantify that. Right? People always want to know, really, is that really true? Show me some numbers. This is an example of an actual customer of Acrolinx. I think it's a pretty typical example. It's not nowhere near the largest, but pretty typical. So this customer has a website, a web property with about 1 million pages. And those pages attract 140 million people or visitors per year. And those visitors spend on average 2 minutes and 50 seconds for each visit. That adds up to 6.6 million hours of engagement with the brand, understanding the character of the company. That's experience, right? That's communication. And that's why content is so important for businesses. So what do we do? So we help our customers create and maintain a content asset portfolio that helps to build relationships. Okay, that's what we do. What is good content that helps build relationships? We believe it really has 3 primary characteristics. It needs to be risk-free, it needs to be on brand, and it needs to be impactful. So what does that mean? Risk-free, is it factual? Did it offend anyone? Is it inclusive? Is it responsible? Does it represent your tone of voice, the character of your organization, your company? your identity. Do you come across as trustworthy? And then impactful is, what's the purpose of the content, and did it achieve that? Was it relevant? Was it useful? Was it satisfying to the user? Or to the reader? If it's marketing content, did it evoke a response, right, that was desired? Was it effective and impactful for the business? So that's what really constitutes good content. How do we do this? What do we do? There's really three key parts of the solution. The first is that we help companies configure their corporate guidelines, okay, into the solution. And big companies, like some of those that I mentioned, have very complicated corporate guidelines. They're different by target audience, they're different sometimes by sub-brand. The way that they want to communicate with their customers, if it's a support situation with empathy, clarity, may be different than the way they want to communicate in marketing. So it varies and has tremendous complexity. Pharmaceutical companies communicate very formally to practitioners and very differently to patients, right? So very, very complex. Once that's configured, you can then do two basic things. The first thing is you can govern your content. So what that means is, pre-publishing, you can automatically check the content when it's in repositories, and also when it's in a workflow to stop bad content from getting published. Okay, automation. And when you find bad content, then it needs to trigger authoring assistance, right, for people to go and fix it. So then, of course, the third area is authoring assistance. We help provide guidance to writers, so when they're writing a piece and they check it, they get recommendations on changes to make so that it aligns to the corporate guidelines. Okay, that's what we do. This is just a visual of that. So you can see on the left, in the center, you can see corporate guidelines. That's the heart of the solution. On the left, you can see governance, and that integrates into, these are just a few examples of repositories and systems, but many different repositories. And then on the authoring assistance side, we integrate and provide that guidance to writers in a tremendous number of different authoring environments. So I think the deck will be shared. So if you'd like to see the full list, you can scan that barcode. So then this character showed up. Our business, our core business that I just went through is based on rules and, if you will, traditional AI. This is a fantastical machine. This is a game changer, right? So we, like many companies, started to think about what do we need to do, right? And how do we incorporate this into our technology so that it's valuable and safe for our customers, enterprise customers, big companies. So I also saw McKinsey on the list. Is there anybody actually from McKinsey? No. Okay, so let's talk about McKinsey. So McKinsey published a great article last Friday. And it was an article about what are the 4 essential questions that a board should be asking about generative AI. These are the 4. First one, how will generative AI affect our industry and our company? Very strategic question. I expect that every company represented here today is grappling with that. Second question, how will we balance value creation with risk management? Value creation is clear with generative AI. You can create a lot more content with generative AI. That saves money, and that's very valuable. But what is the risk tolerance of the organization? That's the key question, right? Third question, how do you organize? How should we organize for generative AI? McKinsey's view is it needs to be, because it's so disruptive, moving so fast, that it needs to be a very coordinated approach. Pick a few use cases that will have high impact and take a coordinated approach to impact those. So companies are struggling with that. And then the fourth, although they're all number 1, I see, as just checking to see if anybody noticed. Do we have the necessary capabilities? So what capabilities? Three things: technology, talent, and culture. Is your company culturally ready for change? Those are the three big components. What we hear about all of these, the most of the conversations we're having with our customers, because of the nature of our business, are around number one. So I wanted to share with you a little bit about what we're doing. Okay, so how we're incorporating this into our technology. So we have launched a beta, and we have customers who are registered and getting ready to get started on the beta. And our beta is focused on three key areas. And it's focused on let me just back up for a minute. It would have been relatively easy for us to just plug ChatGPT into our authoring assistants, right? Just plug it in. The problem with that is it is not sufficiently safe for most of our customers. Maybe fine for individuals, but for our large enterprise customers, that is beyond their risk tolerance, okay? So we've taken a bit of a different approach. Three different user journeys to start. So the first, we tune based on your best content. So what that means is we work with our customers to select their best content, not using the human eye, using technology at scale, because a large enterprise needs to be able to operate at scale. We help them tune their best content at scale, and then when that is used later by people who are actually creating content, you know that it's correct, up-to-date information without misinformation. Second, when a writer receives a recommendation on a change to make in the content, they can now click a button and automatically make that change. For example, today, someone may get a recommendation that says, this sentence has 40 words. It's unclear. Break it up into shorter sentences. If you don't speak English as your first language, that can take you a lot of time. Now, you press a button. There's efficiency gains. Third is what we all know, creating new content, right, with generative AI. And again, that can be done safely when an organization has tuned on their best content. Okay, so that's how you can get scale safely. So that's what we're doing. If you were one of those companies that's a customer, some of you are actually already signed up for the beta. If you're not and you're interested, we'd love to talk to you about it. Just please come see myself or anyone else from our team here today. So let me finish with this. Does anyone recognize this? Anyone? Nope. Close. I know the toothpaste got you. Yeah. What? Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. All right. You get the golden ticket. Okay, so in this movie, this is the 2005 version, not the classic. By the way, I asked ChatGPT. There is? I asked ChatGPT a few questions about the movie. I got all the wrong answers, by the way. Okay, so this movie has many themes. One of the themes is that Willy Wonka introduced fantastical machines, right? To create candy, to create toothpaste. Toothpaste that was also a meal, I think. And in this version of the movie, this is William Bucket, I believe, Charlie Bucket's father, and his job was to screw the caps on the toothpaste. And machines came in, and guess what? He lost his job. But at the end of the movie, he actually came back, and when he came back, he was employed again. What was his job when he was employed again? He fixed the machines, right? And so the point is this, that when fantastical machines are created, like generative AI. We all need to change, we need to adapt, or we're going to be left behind, right? That's the reality of it. However, humans will always be in the loop. They need to be in the loop. And when it comes to content, that is not going to change. All right. So with that, thank you. Enjoy the rest of the evening and the drinks.
Thank you so much, Shane. Really interesting. I'm going to welcome up the panel now. And because that was the perfect segue to our panel. We are going to talk about how to make friends with these robots. I want to welcome, we have Jenn Shreve. Jenn is a content design lead at Google. We have next to her is Jane Mosczynski. Jane is the principal content strategist at FM Global, and I'm sitting in Reese's seat. But first, we have Jackie Julie, who's the principal content strategist at Perficient, and Reese Fuller, who is lead content designer at Work & Co. So, thank you all so much for being here. We've been hearing so much about generative AI since the launch of ChatGPT. And, these are smart machines. They're capable of doing things that we thought we only saw in sci-fi. They're capable of writing and designing. And so, it's hard not to feel apprehensive about what's to come. But today I'd like to unpack it, really get down and talk about what is AI good at? What is it not? How can we be the humans in the loop? What does content design look like with these tools, with these fantastical tools? And how can we make AI work for us and not against us? And you all have been experimenting a lot with different Gen AI tools. And so first I want to just talk through, just have you all introduce yourselves. Tell us a bit about who you are, what you do, and what tools you're using in your work. So start with Jenn.
Okay, hi. I'm Jenn and I'm working at Google. I work in ads privacy and safety, so we are responsible for making it clear to the everyday person what information Google uses when personalizing their ads and giving them control over that information. It can be quite tricky to explain in everyday language, but we are doing our best. And I have been trying to use some sort of language learning model or AI tool every day for the last few months. I'm mostly working with Google tools. A lot of them are internal and I can't really talk about them, but Bard I think is the most public one. But I also was playing with ChatGPT before that. All kinds of different use cases, which we'll talk a little bit more about, but I'll leave it there and pass it to Jane.
Thanks, Alli, for having me. My name is Jane Mosczynski. I lead the content strategy team at FM Global. FM Global is a mutual property insurance company. We are a customer of Acrolinx, as was mentioned, and we're also using Azure AI, not ChatGPT. And that is because of the privacy concerns of keeping our intellectual property safe and secure. So I have experimented with ChatGPT separately to learn more about how it can be used, but that is definitely separate from the work that we do with Azure AI.
Hi, I'm Jackie. I lead the content strategy practice at Perficient, which is a global digital consultancy. We serve enterprise clients across industries. Currently, our account mix is heavy in healthcare and insurance. We use a tool called Writer, which after that fantastic presentation, I'm now realizing is something of a competitor with Acrolinx, so we'll get into that. Personally, I've been experimenting with ChatGPT since it was released free to the marketplace, and OpenAI's other tool, DALL-E, is endlessly fun. This is for fun, not for my work. And if you're not doing that, I recommend it.
Hello, everyone. My name is Reese. Thanks, Alli, for having me and us, and thank you all for being here. I'm a lead writer at an agency called Work & Co. We're a product design and development agency headquartered in Dumbo. I've been there for about 3 years or so now, and have also found myself playing with ChatGPT and in OpenAI's GPT playground. We service clients in all industries, making websites, apps, chatbots, things like that. Yeah, and I'm excited for the possibilities in generative AI and tools to support our writing and content design. Yeah, and just experimenting as best I can, trying to get a handle on what all this means. So excited to be here and chat about it.
Yeah, we're reporting from the front lines, as I'm sure we are all on the front lines, just kind of learning and experimenting. It's very early days, but Reese, we'll start with you. You're using OpenAI and ChatGPT. How are you using it? What do you think it works well for?
I've really just been using it as almost like I think of it as like a writing assistant or like a writing partner, someone or something, I should say, getting to a weird space in the conversation, just to bounce ideas off of, help me edit things down shorter or change the voice of a piece of writing, make it more professional or more casual. I think one thing that's been really fun is to hop into the GPT playground and move the temperature sliders back and forth and see how different prompts use different amount of tokens and like learn what all that means, start to get my hands dirty a little bit with it. I think one thing that's been really exciting that has developed at Work & Co. internally is a Figma plugin we're using called GPT Writer that's built using GPT-3 on that model. But what it really does is within a Figma file, you can open it up and at the touch of a button, essentially take a text block and generate new ideas, pull out keywords, pros and cons. So rather than working in your separate browser window, it's just kind of all in a shared workspace with the designers and PMs that you're collaborating with there. So we use that internally, but I've obviously been very careful to not input any sensitive client information using that plugin. But yeah, it's just made the process of writing and brainstorming and kind of noodling collaboratively with other people on the team a little bit easier.
I'd love to actually get a show of hands. How many people here have used ChatGPT? How many people have played in the OpenAI playground? How many have used Writer? How many have used Acrolinks? What about Azure AI? What about Bard? And how many of you, like Reese, have worked with your technical partners and built something internally? Cool. Jenn, you've described, Reese just described ChatGPT as an assistant. You've described it as an imperfect assistant for content designers. So how do you see it helping, and what problems do you think it can solve for us?
So I think the two number one complaints I always hear from content designers are, we're spread too thin, there's not enough of us on the team, and we don't have enough influence, right? And those things are related, right? Because if you're spread too thin and you're doing a lot of like translation descriptions and accessibility labels, and you don't have the time or the bandwidth, right, to be influential and to be working on the big strategy pieces that are really what we should be focusing on. For example, last October, I launched a new product at Google called My Ad Center. We had over 1,000 strings that had to be translated into 81 plus languages concurrently for a global launch, and we had a very short timeline. And we're in a highly regulated industry, and it was a very conversational product. So every string had a paragraph long, description for the translators to explain every single nuance of every single word. It was a very arduous task. I kept apologizing to the guy I had doing it just because it sucked so much. The other day, I plugged into Bard. How would you explain this to someone who was translating it? Holy crap. It was not bad. It wasn't perfect. You need the person in the loop, right? So suddenly I was like, this this is going to free up a ton of time doing a task that really no one wants to do, but is really important. And that's going to give us content designers a lot more bandwidth. Now, it's not perfect. You have to check its work. I've certainly, when I've tried to have it actually write more consumer-facing strings, no thanks, needs an editor. But that really turned on a light switch for me in terms of this could really help us, because we could fight all the fights for headcount and our legitimacy all day, but actually what it really takes to persuade people is doing the work that we're really meant to do, and having time to do that. So if AI can help, I'm all for it.
Jackie, can you tell us a bit more about the Writer platform and how your team is using it at Perficient?
Sure, I feel like my thunder was stolen a little bit, but the original problem that we were trying to solve for was that each of our clients has its own set of complex style guidelines. Has its own set of complex style guidelines. So we have an in-house editing team, and then we also use freelance writers, and managing for all of those differences across all of the different contexts that people are writing and editing became hard to manage. So Writer's flagship product is called Style Guide. So it uses traditional AI similar to Grammarly, where within your authoring environment in real time, it can catch, or it can solve for adherence to complex style guidelines. And they have like out of the box settings for different types, Oxford comma or not to Oxford comma. And then also there are more specific, industry specific rules, such as healthcare being 2 words or 1, et cetera. I mean, you're all familiar with this. So, so that helped us a lot, and that's what started the conversation. And then OpenAI released ChatGPT, and that really changed the whole market. And now all of a sudden, all of our clients were asking us about our perspective on generative AI and how could we help them form their own company positions on how these tools should be leveraged. And then similarly, our own teams were experimenting with public LLMs, and there weren't a lot of guidelines yet about how to do so responsibly. So as our partnership grew with Writer, they also were releasing their Gen AI tool, which is now called Templates. So it's a proprietary LLM. So as opposed to ChatGPT, whose LLM was trained on a large swath of the internet from 2 years ago. So its fidelity in terms of factual accuracy is not always dependable. And as you know, if you've ever asked it or prompted it for anything fact-based or maybe up-to-date, you've gotten out of date information. And that's one of the areas where it breaks down. So Writer trains its model more regularly. The information is more up to date, but then also within your own instance, you can input exemplars of different content types to train it. So for a particular client, if there's marketing emails that have performed particularly well, or product pages that have performed particularly well, now you can train the Gen AI on their own best practices. So combine that with the editorial guidelines in real time, and it's been very powerful for us in terms of achieving efficiencies and also ensuring quality.
And how long have you been using it?
Like 6 months.
Okay. Jane, love to hear from you about Azure AI and Acrolinks and how you're using them at FM Global.
Yeah, sure. We've been a client of Acrolinks for some time, and we use it to ensure that the communications that we're sharing with our customers have that brand fidelity, and that we're using the language, the voice and tone that we want to represent as an organization. So that's been quite an established effort, and we're looking to expand that to get it into that tool into the hands of additional writers within the organization. With Azure AI, that's very new. So that's something that is, we haven't set a course per se, but we're still experimenting and testing it. So more to come.
Yeah. Jackie, could you share a bit more about the specific use cases that your team is using Writer for?
Sure. So well, you should hold it like a baby. So our content strategy practice is largely delivering content audits, content strategies, and then editorial, so actual content optimization and creation for companies who are at some moment of digital transformation. Either they're deep in the M&A cycle and they're consolidating multiple digital properties into one, and it's typically websites as opposed to on the product side. So that last leg, that third phase that we do, right? So audit, strategy, editorial, we're mainly using it in the creation. So once we're creating website content and also a little bit of social media content, email content, we're using it heavily for the first draft, right? So the anxiety of the blank page has been all but eliminated. And that's where the biggest gains are. But then also in earlier phases, we're finding ways to use it as well. So initial ideation for strategies. There are different aspects of the work we do. So there's a brainstorming session. How do you come prepared to that brainstorming session? Well, you can prompt your Gen AI tool, and all of a sudden you have an outline. It's not perfect, but you can get it going. Similarly, we recently used Writer for a competitive analysis. It wasn't the finished output, but it was the starting point, and it was really good.
Reese, you've been experimenting. We were just talking yesterday about some things that you've been trying out. Can you share some of those with us?
Yeah, I mean, I think really similar to Jackie, it's just thinking about these tools as a way to get a really solid first draft out. I think a lot of the time, replacing that lorem ipsum in a designer's, Figma file with just a little bit of input from me and a push of a button on ChatGPT can really get the process going and start a conversation there. I think what I've really found to be a fun thing to experiment with again in the OpenAI ChatGPT playground is just creating like really comprehensive and almost like excruciatingly detailed prompts and seeing what I can get back from that interface. Just kind of pushing buttons and different levers there. I think part of what I found surprisingly really challenging about using these tools is that they're really bad at math. So something as simple as how many characters is this? You can give it the same, string of text 4 different times, you might get back 4 different character counts. But as far as just like generating new ideas and taking existing bits of writing and copy and iterating on that, I think it's really, really been a handy tool.
Cool. Yeah, and I'm going to ask about best practices too in a little bit. Jane, I want to hear you. I know your team has been using them for using acrolinks for translation, or for your field workers have been using it to draft field reports. Yes.
So they're not using it for the risk analysis, but we have an editorial team that uses acrolinks in order to refine those reports.
Okay. So the editorial team gets the reports and uses acrolinks.
Uses acrolinks, correct. Just to add to some of the points that my fellow panelists have been making. One of my early introductions to ChatGPT was through my 18-year-old, who was eager to embrace ChatGPT, and how might that help him in his final year in his AP English class. So we had a very interesting conversation about that, and it turns out he wasn't using it to actually generate papers, but he was using it to get new ideas, to test out hypotheses and learn from it. So more of a guide and an informal partner in the process, which I was very relieved. But I think that's a lesson for all of us too, that those are ways in which we can incorporate it into our day-to-day as well.
Yeah. Now, Jenn, this question's for you. What do the tools you've been using not work well for? And I'll put it another way. What should humans keep doing and even do more of?
Right. So I like to say humans should do what humans can do, only humans can do, and machines should do what machines can do for humans. And what I mean by that is there's just even writing for me is also thinking. They're very concurrent, right? And I don't, right now at least, AI cannot do the thinking for me. I can't tell it what to say. I mean, you have to prompt it. You've got to write those prompts. You've got to think about what you want to say, and you can generate something out of it. But it's actually not doing the thinking for you. And the writing itself can be, I would call it kind of verbose and fluffy and kind of vacuous, right? So the actual substantive content, what you are trying to say, is not going to come from the AI. How you want to say it, if you want to play around, you can get some ideas from it. So it kind of the analogy I use is like we become more the conductor and less in the orchestra to kind of tease out things from the AI, but we still have to know the score, and we still have to know what we're trying to evoke from it. And so I can see the role of writer starting to shift a little bit, but the substantive part is there. And an example is yesterday, I wrote a 10-page, long strategy document for, that was a synthesis of like years of knowledge that I had to direct a product decision that was being made and to help influence it. I could have certainly plugged in pieces of it or asked for an outline but the thinking, the actual knowledge that went into that came from me. And I'm, maybe the machines will get there someday. I don't know, but they're not there today. And so I think there's a lot of that. And tone is a really interesting one too. I mean, I think when you actually try to ask AI to do something, make it friendly, make it conversational, make it this, it's still pretty cliched. So you still need that editor, you need that human to kind of, guide the final output. And there's some pretty interesting examples of when people have not been guarding what comes out of AI, what can happen. So that's how I think about it.
No, I'm a firm believer that everyone needs an editor, and so even the robots need editors.
Yes.
So listen, we've talked about prompts that's come up, and we're already seeing roles like prompt engineering emerge. And Jackie, you've used the term AI whispering, which I'd never heard, but I love. Can you tell us more about that? And have you come to any specific tips for getting the best out of AI tools?
Sure. So I did not coin the term AI whispering. I heard it first from May Habib, who is the CEO of Writer. But the idea is that it's one step beyond engineering. It's it's the art part of the science of engineering. So there are different best practices that are already emerging, and I'm sure that a lot of you are following prompting guides and people who are publishing these guidelines, right? So your prompt should be precise and concise, short, conversational, and very specific and accurate. And then there are all of these sort of levels up. Right now, our team is using a lot of act as prompting. So you can tell your Gen AI tool to act as a particular type of subject matter expert or a particular type of person within an organization. And that does more than just influence the tone of the output, but also the perspective, the underlying content direction of where the output is coming from. So a lot of other tips that we've been experimenting with, I would say, providing your audience, providing the format that you would like the output in, like that's all highly relevant. You can also ask to include certain keywords or to consider a certain counter argument. So, from like a CRO or a sales perspective, you want to make sure that any objections that are going to arise from this piece of content, that's already been considered in that first draft. Those are the ones that are sort of coming to mind most immediately. Sorry, I feel like there were two parts of your questions. One was about some tips and tricks, which I voiced over. What was the other one, Alli?
Yeah, so basically, any tips for getting to the best outputs. So I think you covered it.
Okay, great. So the other thing that I wanted to mention then, maybe it was just in my mind that I bifurcated it, and now we're all along this journey together. So the other one is to experiment. So like those are guidelines, but then what's AI whispering? So like you follow those guidelines, and then how can you keep iterating to get better outputs? So one thing is to experiment with the structure of your prompt. So sometimes you'll use a sentence like, write me a product description from the perspective of X targeting Y, etc. We've gotten some really good outputs with much more pared down inputs, where it will just say tone, millennial, semicolon, audience, women in their 20s, looking to buy a car, semicolon, like just hitting all of those inputs as succinctly as possible, and the outputs have been closer. And there's a sense of like artful reverse engineering that happens. You start to develop all these tools in your arsenal around structure and different inputs that you can use in your prompts. And then depending on the output, if it's not quite right, you're like, oh, I can pull this lever to get it closer.
So that's the whispering part of it.
I would say so, yes.
Yeah, cool. Everyone else, anything you would want to add to that, to what Jackie was sharing? Any other tips, tricks, things you've learned in your experiments?
I mean, I think you just keep trying. If you don't get what you want the first time, because AI is going to guess. It's never embarrassed about giving a wrong answer. And it gives some really wrong answers. So you have to just play and play to get the translation description. I think I tried 3 or 4 different prompts until I got something that was really usable. But that's, yeah. And then you kind of figure out what works, and all the different models are different. So it really, whatever your AI is, your pet, you have to train it. Yeah, keep experimenting. And it's going to change fast too. I think it's going to get better. It's going to get smarter as every month, really.
And Reese, you mentioned earlier, keep things concise, short. Did I just put
Yeah,
that?
no, absolutely. And I think one thing again, like we've all said, experimentation is key. I think being as pointed, concise, specific in your prompts as you can be tends to help. I think another thing that I found really interesting in my experimentation is like the difference in a prompt between saying act as, for example, like this specific, like act as Tiger Woods versus act as the best golfer in the world. I think given how these models are trained, they may have less information about a Tiger Woods specifically, but can extrapolate, given the data that they have, like what the best golfer in the world would talk or write like, you'll get maybe a different response. So it's like just one other additional nuance to maybe add. But yeah, again, experimentation is key.
Yeah, no,
I have
that's
sort of
interesting.
a funny story about this. So I was with my father before this talk, and he asked, like, what are you doing tonight? And I said generative AI, and he didn't understand. I'm sure a lot of us do things that maybe our parents don't understand. So I pulled open ChatGPT on my phone, and I asked him, I was like, we're going to create content. A robot's going to help us create content. So my parents are Jewish. My mother is the president of her temple. And my father said, and I'm like, okay, so like what, like who should write it? Like, and he's like, okay, how about mom? I'm like, okay, so act as the president of a conservative Jewish temple in New Jersey. And I'm like, what's the context? And he says, opening remarks for a women's Passover Seder. Seder is the traditional and somewhat ritualistic meal at the Passover holiday. We put that in. Oh, the output was so bang on the money. And he was blown away. I'm going to say phrases for anyone for whom this is culturally resonant. I think you'll enjoy it. It said, as we bask in the glow of the candlelights, as we like ruminate on themes of freedom and history, it was so good. And I said to him, so you can see that with very little editing, this is 100% usable. And he said, Jackie, I think no editing. He thought it nailed it.
All right, so synagogues need to start embracing AI. Rabbis, get on this. Okay, all right. So, I want to start talking about the ethical considerations. We've been talking about all the great things it can do, but, Jen, you mentioned earlier that AI can produce inaccurate, biased results. How should we be thinking about those risks?
Yeah, I mean, there's the ethics of ingestion, and that's in the news right now. And then there's the output, right? And a friend of mine did an experiment where she had AI write Wikipedia entries for Nobel Prize winning women, I think it was. And they wrote believable, perfect Wikipedia entries that were completely inaccurate and factually wrong, right? And so we do have this situation where a lot of content can be created without checks and balances, be put out in the world and be sort of believable, right? And it sounds good. And it could be quite wrong, quite misleading, quite dangerous in some cases. So, and that's just one of many ethical issues. There's a lot of things around authorship as well. So the good news, I think, is that we as content people, we actually are very important players in the ecosystem of AI, right? I mean, it needs standards, it needs guidelines, it needs voice and tone. We already are at the table, and I think we're very well positioned to advocate for what's right, putting guardrails on what it will and won't do. That's a big one, right? It should just say, no, I won't do that, right? But it's not going to say that unless someone tells it to do that, right? So I think it's actually an exciting time, and I think this gets to something that was mentioned during the Acrolinks presentation, right? There's new rules that are going to be created here, right? And I think content designers are going to play an important role because it's generating content, and that's what we do. And so we can shape and guide it, but we have to be vigilant, I think, and I think it can also reflect the worst of our society, right? And so again, we need to make sure that it's representing the best of us and what we want to all aspire to as humanity, and it's serving humans and not, I don't know, the other way around.
Yeah, well said.
Thank you.
Jane, how are you thinking about it, and what can we do to mitigate these risks?
I think we need more voices. I think what's been inputted, at least to ChatGPT, you mentioned earlier that it's already 2 years old. So we need to make sure that what's being inputted is up to date. It's very homogeneous, and it's very skewed toward English. So there's many biases that are present, and those will only amplify if we don't participate. So we need to be involved in the process of asking questions and refining and pushing back. There's a lot of erroneous material, and you have to fact check. So we need to be vigilant, and we need to participate, and we need to make sure that many voices are participating.
Yeah, I mean, at Google, at least internally, we're constantly able to report problems with what we get back, right? So if it's ableist language, if it's ageist, all of that stuff, you can report it and explain why it is, and that's helping to train it. It's a great position to be in at the company that's actually generating this, right? So, I find those roles, like I would say do the opposite of, oh God, AI, it's coming for our jobs. Embrace it and get in there, because that's the way that you're going to be able to shape it. Sign up for those committees, volunteer, get in there.
Yeah. The concept of the human in the loop is actually part of Mastercard's guidelines, which they recently released around the use of AI. Curious, first, how many of your companies have released guidelines around AI? How many of your companies have released guidelines around AI? All right, not that many. For those who there are guidelines in place, can you share a little bit about what they are, what they say?
I mean, had a little moment with Jack. I don't know if guidelines is the right word to use, but we have published on work.co/AI, learnings, insights, thoughts, ideas as more of like a contribution to a conversation. We're all still learning in this field, and all still bettering our understanding of how to use these tools responsibly and safely. And although coming up with really exciting and compelling and innovative new concepts, I think are being very careful not to overstep or overstate a level of like expertise, right? So yeah, that's all available online. I think we've done a number of sort of roundtables with stakeholders and leaders in our client organizations, and have had some really like fruitful conversations, and those are all available there as well. But I think in the ways that we're still learning how to adopt these tools into our processes, want to share that with the rest of the community too.
Yeah, so the reason that I sort of around guidelines is because it's not a public facing document. I wouldn't even call it officially public. There's a deck that my team put together with inputs from other teams, and we're using that as a best practice guideline. Part of that was informed by our legal team. We serve clients. We cannot use generative AI unless the clients know that we're using generative AI. So they have to opt in for transparency. And then obviously we need to fact check and refine all outputs. No outputs will be delivered directly to a client.
What about you, Jenn?
Yeah, there's a lot of guides. So there's sort of the high level ethical guidelines. There's for writers, certainly no company secrets go in, even to our own system, and nothing that it writes goes out. So yeah, that is at a very basic level. In terms of the ethical, it's a lot of benefit versus risk and don't harm metrics to sort of try to determine, is this going to help people or harm people, and how much, and where do you draw that line? And then safeguards on the technology itself. So really keep preventing it from doing things that we know are going to be problematic.
So I'm going to ask one more question, and then we'll have time for a couple questions, and then back to eating and drinking. Just any parting words for the audience? Any words of wisdom? We'll start with you, Reese.
Sure. I'd say, just maintain as much as you can if you're coming at it with some apprehension or anxiety around, is AI going to take my job? It's not going to be an AI, but maybe another writer or content designer who knows how to use AI better than we do. So I'd say approach it learning how to use the tools and like what they mean, with as much like cautious optimism as possible, being really conscious of the ways that they can go wrong, but still adopting it into your process and workflow as best you can. So cautious optimism is my tagline for the day.
Jackie.
Yeah, there hasn't been such a meaningful disruption in our field from my perspective since this, certainly in my tenure. So I'm very excited. I think that this has the potential to take a lot of the repetition and drudgery out of our work. Obviously, some of the repetition and drudgery is that on which we cut our teeth. So as we're thinking about those entry and junior level roles, particularly on the content generation side, I imagine that there is concern around the future, right? The future of entry level roles and of junior level roles, has it already been replaced by generative AI? I think that there are some businesses that are inherently more complex, particularly if you're B2B, let's say. There are certain technology businesses where Gen AI simply can't understand what's being developed or sold, or the messaging around that with the level of nuance that the human in the loop can bring to it. But I have every faith that the technology will get there eventually. So the question becomes, is there going to be a gap in our workforce? Because now when we need those mid-senior players, they're not there anymore because maybe they chose a different field because they didn't come up. And I think that the answer there, in terms of any apprehensions about job security, is that we now have this extremely powerful tool, and that becomes a part of the job. So if you're junior, or if you're mentoring anybody who's junior, definitely they should start becoming prompt engineers. They should become the most powerful AI whisperers that they are. That's the best way to add value to their organizations. And I think that that's true for all of us too. But beyond even cautious optimism, I'm so excited and optimistic, and I hope that everyone feels and shares that.
Jane, what about you?
So the content space isn't the only space that's being disrupted. So our code poet friends are also going to be disrupted. Our medical professions will also be disrupted by AI. It's not So it's not just us. I would just encourage people to be as aware as possible, look for those opportunities. I just recently read about Bloomberg creating their own chat GPT with all of their content. There are going to be private enterprises that are going to be doing that. That opens other opportunities. Yes, there will be a paywall. That's another avenue. Also, keep in mind there's a carbon cost to all of this. These processes require a tremendous amount of energy. So that is something that I think we all have responsibility to keep in mind.
Such a good point. Yeah, everyone's thinking it's cheaper and more efficient, but it may not be. And so I would just say, yeah, stay. I think it's early. Stay curious, play, explore, and be vigilant at the same time. So and advocate within your organizations for them to do the right thing.
Thank you. Questions? Does anyone have any questions they want to ask? Yes.
Oh. Hi.
Exciting.
It's a very interesting discussion because I've worked at IBM like maybe 6 years ago. We were always data and AI. It's all about automatic workflows for enterprise solutions, which is like the same across the board for any company. How can we free out time for HR, supply chains, et cetera? And I find it interesting now that it's gone into content marketing and design, where we as brands have to offer unique selling propositions to our audiences to stand out. And I think you mentioned it, Reese, and to your point, Jackie, about your father, there's templates. So how much work are we putting into after we get the templates to act? Because audiences are not stupid. They'll see the template, like we can predict the outcome after reading the article. I'm like, oh, I think I just read this from Mastercard or Google. I don't know who this is, but it's the same formula. AI is just giving us a template. You still have to provide the value. Is it easier to start from a blank page or to take the template and try to make it different? It's like doing your thesis, right, in college and copying somebody else's paper and then changing the words. We're not there yet, but it's like, how are you dealing with that? Because quite frankly, we're not there yet. I'm seeing the same templates across the board.
Would anyone like to take that?
I don't know if this will fully answer your question, but I loved it.
Another father like yours.
Yeah, so I think that one concern is with an LLM, it's being trained on existing language patterns. So while we talk about the power of Gen AI, it is not generative or creative to the point that it can create, and maybe my fellow panelists will correct me on this, like a novel pattern. The way that it works is that it's taking existing patterns and leveraging those to create something new within them. So I think that this comes back to the human in the loop, where if we want to innovate our field, we need to keep creating novel patterns and thinking, and those then become inputs on which to train the models and to create new templates. Like I said, I'm leaving it up to these smart folks to fully answer your question, but that's what came to mind.
I agree, yeah.
Melinda?
Great point.
Oh gosh, wow. Mine is kind of a follow-on. So as the internet becomes more populated with AI generated content and we're training AI on content created by AI, first of all, what do you expect will happen and how can we mitigate that?
The internet will just eat itself.
Yeah, way to play softball, Melinda.
It'll just implode. No, that wasn't. Would anyone like to take that one?
I would suggest maybe curation becomes a bigger role and more important for organizations. Let's cull what we're putting out there. Let's be more vigilant about ensuring that we have the most accurate, up-to-date content. I think that's a current issue that we're good at creating, but we're not good at weeding the garden, and perhaps that will help us push us in the right direction of weeding out what we shouldn't have available.
There's always a back and forth, right? As I think we will probably go through some really awkward phase where everything starts sounding the same, right? And then there's going to be a backlash to that, right? And then suddenly the role of the writer will become important again. Well, we need that unique voice. We need, the person who can come up with something unique and a different way of saying this. And so it will be, I imagine, a bit of a back and forth. And it's going to be weird.
Hi, I have a question. I'm curious, like, how in the weeds on prompt engineering have you gotten? Like, have you seen consistent outputs from inputs? Like, have you started to diagram your prompts? Like, I'm just curious, like, what have you found through that process?
Who would like to take this
I
one,
mean,
Reese?
I would say there's a lot of really good reading that at least I've been doing on like Twitter or Medium posts, like Jackie mentioned earlier, about ways people are structuring and approaching prompt engineering that are delivering, intended or expected results. I would say I haven't often, if ever, given ChatGPT or any other instance of this technology like the same prompt and gotten like the same exact answer back, unless I've like really deliberately been trying to do that. So I think it always, like, there's always some level of variability or randomness or chaos baked in. And I think that's kind of what makes it interesting and fun to continue experimenting with. I don't know if you have different experience or similar experience. That tracks. That tracks. Great. That tracks.
Right. We have time for 2 more questions.
Okay, thank you. Just a question. Like AI is, as you guys mentioned, it's pretty horizontal, right? It's not only ChatGPT, and it's applied to different kind of industries that are regulated differently. And as Jane mentioned, it's super important to participate in developing and getting it better, right? So how do we balance participating, getting it better, and what is acceptable risk appetite on this journey? Like, we are so far from the finish line, right? And it touches finance, it touches medical, it touches content. Like, some of the mistakes can be quite life-threatening and like very, very severe consequences. Like, do we have obligation industry-wide and company-wide to have this clearly defined risk appetite and traceability somehow?
Well,
Thank you.
I think that's an excellent question. And I will say, I think the fact that you've seen guidelines come out of a Mastercard and a Google, but not some other companies. I mean, most people didn't raise their hands. I think the more risk averse a company is, the more they are an FM global, right? You're not able to use ChatGPT at all, right? So I think the more the lower the risk tolerance, the more you're seeing regulations and guidelines put in place. And I seeing companies err on the side of, yes, experiment, but like, this is not for public consumption. And increasingly, we're seeing tools that are being built for enterprises where it is, a closed environment that's not using internet data. So yeah, I think it really depends on the industry, would be my answer. One more question from over here. Oh no, there's no, go, Mike, go ask your question.
So something that Jen mentioned that I thought was interesting about, the drudgery work that content designers might not have to do if they have the capability to use AI to do some of those things, and that it could be used to be more influential. And I'm curious, just thinking of trends, do you think businesses will go for the efficiencies and go to the way of, well, then I just need less people? Or will they actually give the space, like from your leadership positions, what are you seeing people wanting to do, like in that space?
Not sure. I think if we're in very early phases, and businesses shift resources for a variety of reasons. So stay tuned. I think we'll watch that play out.
Yeah, I think some will fully embrace it, and there's going to be some really public embarrassments, and then they're going to reel back. And I'm trying to predict the future here, but I certainly there are people who are very excited. But I'm also like, content creation can be expensive, but it also isn't like the most expensive things at companies either. So I'm like, if we're looking for efficiencies, I'm not as worried, but we'll see.
I'm going to fight for Jackie's mom. She is not going to lose her.
I think we had one more question, and then this is our last one.
Thank you so much for sharing your work processes with us. That's super exciting. I'm wondering if any of you are seeing any accessibility applications in your products, like, for example, how Google has been able to make closed captioning more available for users with accessibility issues through use of language processing AI.
That's an excellent question. I'm going to send it to Jenn.
I know. It's something that I'm most excited about. If we could, like, in an automated way, put accessibility labels on every website on the world, that would be freaking amazing, right? The closed captioning, there's just a lot of ways that it can be used, and I think it's early stages.
Green lines.
But a great example of green lines, but it's a great way. It's a great way that we could be influencing things right there, right? Hey, there's this way that we can use AI, and we'll all get promoted. And make the world a better place.
We'll end on that note. Thank you all. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Don't forget, sorry, there's one more slide here to put up. Don't forget to, if you're not already signed, there you go. The UX Content Design NYC mailing list. Get in touch. Thank you, Melinda.
I've been bewildered by these fairy tales of